the book is Acting White. When did that horrible idea first arise?
Well, I traced the book back to the middle part of the 19th century, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, was very brilliant in her portrayal of the characters in that book. And I used that as a baseline because when you ask, what does it mean to be acting white, I first had to ask the question, what does it mean to be acting black? And acting black in the middle part of the 19th century was you weren't very literate, you didn't have a religious grounding, and you weren't a strong family person. And what Beecher Stowe did, all of the major black characters in that book, with the exception of Uncle Tom himself, could pass as white. And why? Because they were literate, they were very well educated, they were intelligent. And I used that as the baseline of what it meant to be acting white if you were black, because somehow, and she even uses this in the book, if you had any of those attributes, that somehow not only were you inauthentically black, but you were somehow acting white.
Wow. Is it a revelation to most people that this idea, this terrible idea, arose so long ago?
It is, and that was one of the most fascinating aspects of doing the research for this book, Dennis, is that, I had just figured that maybe this was a term that people were using when I was growing up in the 80s, or whether it was something that President Barack Obama had encountered when he was running, when he was a senator. But no, I traced it back to the middle part of the 19th century, and it astounds me that if you're reading the book Acting White and you trace it forward, it wasn't a one-off phenomenon. In other words, if you go to the turn of the 20th century, where you had Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois going at it, and Booker T. Washington accused Du Bois of acting white. Why? Because he was the first African-American to graduate from Harvard University, and Booker T. Washington felt that blacks' place was to be on the farm. They were to be agrarian, they were to be mechanical, but they didn't want to threaten whites by becoming literate and educated. And it's just amazing to me that some of the most famous African-American figures that you see, from those two to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King to the present day, of Jesse Jackson accusing Barack Obama, who, quote, acts like he's white. I mean, it's a phenomenon that's been with us for over 150 years and one that needs to stop.
I sit here and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, it's so obvious what you're saying. Why doesn't it catch on? I mean, why wouldn't one want blacks, young or old, to read well, write well, speak well? What possible beauty or affirmation of the black human being could be in its opposite? My question to you, Ron Christie, was, why would anybody in his right mind think that those things are not to be pursued?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's a social pathology that we've seen since the groundbreaking Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education. In that case, it overruled Plessy versus Ferguson that had put in place for over 50 years in the United States the separate and inherently unequal education practice in the United States that, of course, permeated every aspect of American life. And after the Brown case, black children were allowed to go to school as freely as white children and to participate and to learn and to try to achieve the American dream. And in the book Acting White, Dennis, I really note that the breakdown starts with the rise of the Black Power movement and heading into the 1970s, where it was no longer chic to assimilate, but blacks drew a lot of the strength and power from being separate and really of turning their back on the accomplishments of the Brown decision. And as you head into the 1980s and the present day, I have a story in the introduction of a young student that I tutored here in the inner city of Washington, D.C., that he said to me, Mr. Christie, why do you dress white, and why do you act white, and why do you talk white? And I asked this child, Dennis, who was a first grader, and I said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by acting white? And he said, well, you don't act like black people. And it's almost a reversal going all the way back to Uncle Tom's Cabin, that if somehow you didn't act in a hip-hop fashion or if you didn't talk a certain way, that if you applied yourself and you studied hard, that you weren't acting properly, you were being inauthentically black and acting white. And that it just broke my heart.
Well, here, let me even restate my question, which you've answered beautifully, but I want to make it even sharper. There is no parallel to this. Armenians who retain an Armenian identity, Jews who retain a Jewish identity, Chinese who retain a Chinese identity, all of them value study and hard work and never assume that that means you've assimilated. Why only blacks?
Well, unfortunately, I think that it's been a dominant aspect of black culture that education is the province of whites. And I've seen it with my own
but what do they say about Asians? Asians outdo whites in dressing well and studying well and playing in orchestras well. So what does one say about that?
I'm as stunned as you are, and I've seen this in my own family of looking at my grandparents and looking at some of my cousins that they achieve educational advancement because that's what people do. And I thought, that's crazy.
Wait, we've really now hit cellular hell. Here's something from his book. In 1991, while working as a junior legislative assistant, he met U.S. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who said to him, "You are a sellout to your race. White people work for Republicans." How are you a sellout to your... First of all, can you be a sellout to your race? Is there any other group that says that? You're a sellout to your race? You are a sellout to your race. Why doesn't it go the other way around? If you can be a sellout to blacks, can't you be a sellout to whites? It's not logically tenable. Acting white means that there is something different about white. Therefore, it's okay for whites to act. Whites can study hard. That's okay. So if a white doesn't, see how ironic that is? You realize, and this is all the province of the black left. See, that's the irony here. This is a black conservative. The harm done to blacks, one day there will be a great awakening in black life at the damage that the left has done to them. Ron Christie, in his book, Acting White, calls for an end to affirmative action. He says such programs have perpetuated a stereotype that has become self-fulfilling. Acting black is doing poorly and needing government assistance and quota programs to try and fail to pull even with whites. Is there anything the Ku Klux Klan could come up with that is more demeaning to blacks than the notion of quote unquote acting white? Really, I don't know what they could. I don't know what a white racist could come up with that would do more damage to blacks in terms of ideas. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show.